Everybody loses money at some point. It's easy to do, be it through a hole in your pocket or a luckless night at the casino. But losing $1 billion or more is actually very difficult. With the complex assets and shares that usually surrounds a billionaire's fortune, losing it all requires some colossal slip-ups. But the people I'll be discussing today could write the book on billion-dollar blunders, so pay close attention. If you ever make it big, learning from these guys might just save you from total ruin. Number 5. Elizabeth Holmes. With a life of billionaire ambitions and the smarts to manifest them, Elizabeth Holmes seemed destined for greatness. She dropped out of Stanford University at 19 to pursue a company she'd started during her time there. The company, eventually named Theranos, offered revolutionary services and technology for diagnosing and monitoring diseases and administering drugs, and soon became one of Silicon Valley's most promising startups. By 2014, $400 million of investments had flooded in, valuing Theranos at $9 billion, and Holmes had net worth of $4.5 billion. Holmes operated a policy of extreme secrecy regarding Theranos operations, which investors were satisfied with, until in 2015, when the FDA launched an investigation into the company's methods. Holmes' chief scientist had warned her about inaccuracies in their tests and problems with their technology, but she continued business regardless. The FDA discovered these inaccuracies, as well as the fact that Theranos had been using standard industry blood analysis equipment in place of their own failing tech, and investigations were made public. Holmes shut Theranos down for good in 2018, forced to return money to investors after being charged with massive fraud. And the fortunes of both her company and herself dwindled to nothing. Her trial is set for 2020, and the future looks anything but bright for Holmes.
Initially set to begin in July 2020, Holmes' criminal trial was further delayed till July 2021 due to the coronavirus pandemic. Trial was further delayed due to Holmes' pregnancy. Finally, in 2022, Holmes found guilty in 4 of 11 federal charges. Holmes faces up to 20 years in prison, as well as a fine of $250,000 plus restitution for each count.
Number 4. Adolf Merckle. The story of Adolf Merckle is one of tragedy, bad timing, and even worse luck. Through the late 20th century, Merckle developed his father's chemical business into the largest pharmaceutical retailer in Germany. This, alongside other ventures in pharmacy, finance, and construction, landed him a net worth of $12.8 billion by 2007. Number 1 for excess, Merckle rode a 15-year-old bicycle, shopped at Aldi, and flew economy. But his frugal living couldn't save him from the economic crash of 2008. Trouble came during an otherwise routine acquisition of a British cement company by VEM, Merckle's holding company. Merckle used his own cement company shares as collateral to see the deal through. When share prices for Merckle's holding company dropped a whopping 75% in the banking crisis, banks began demanding accelerated loan repayments. Merckle was forced to make personal guarantees from his personal assets, costing him an initial $3.6 billion. A speculative bet in October that year that Volkswagen's share prices would drop became another billion-dollar mistake for Merckle when VW's stock skyrocketed, quadrupling in price. In January 2009, with the collapse of his family business seeming inevitable, he threw himself in front of a train near his home. He likely realized his pledge to personally front VEM's debts, which by then reached an extra $6 billion, would have been the end of his family's name in the business world. Number 3. Anton Schlecker. Sometimes the quickest to rise fall the hardest. No one exemplifies this better than Anton Schlecker. The German tycoon opened his first drugstore in 1975, and within 2 years had opened 100. By 2011, his 14,000-store continental empire was worth $10 billion. As for Schlecker, his personal wealth peaked at $4 billion in 2011, which he liked to splash on his expensive sports car collection. But insurmountable competition from rival chains, mixed with cases of fraud and illegally underpaying employees, led to the Schlecker empire's collapse. An expensive marketing push to restore the brand's reputation failed spectacularly, and Schlecker declared bankruptcy in 2012. All the while, Anton had been funneling millions into his family's personal accounts. A $14 million mistake he and his family would pay for both monetarily and with jail time. Falling from a total of $14 billion under his control to nothing, This man should have invested in a parachute. Number 2. Bernie Madoff. Beginning in penny stocks, Bernie Madoff grew himself into one of the most prominent, respected, and influential figures in the stock market throughout the 70s and 80s. By the late 80s, he was making around $100 million a year, allowing him to transfer his wealth into houses, yachts, sports cars, and various overseas accounts. Thanks to his magic touch, investors soon began pumping as much as $300 million a pop into his well-respected firm. The substantial returns Madoff presented to his investors kept him happy, but were, in fact, entirely fabricated. His system revolved around using money from new investors to pay returns to any existing clients who sought to cash out, which meant walking a tightrope act since as far back as the 80s. But it was only when investors attempted to redeem $7 billion at once that Bernie got rumbled. In reality, there was only around $300 million available. In December 2008, reportedly upon discovering the nature of Bernie's Ponzi scheme, his sons reported him to the federal authorities. While $65 billion was the often stated total defrauded from investors, around 2/3 of this was actually the fictional returns Bernie had convinced his investors existed. In reality, the total principal funds were more like $20 billion. Regardless, Bernie was given a $150 million loan. 50-year sentence, his personal assets were forfeited, or at least as many could be located, which was tricky with such a gifted con man, amounting to just under $1 billion. The punishment was extended to his family, who were forced to forfeit their own assets for their involvement. Bernie, if you wanted to bond over finance with your family, you could have just played Monopoly. Number 1. Ike Batista. Brazilian entrepreneur Ike Batista began his career as a door-to-door insurance salesman, but soon moved into the precious metals and oil trades, taking the gold and diamond mining markets by storm through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Batista was sitting on $36 billion by 2012. He became well known for his playboy lifestyle of Lamborghinis, yachts, and private jets. But despite Batista's ambitions to become the richest man on earth, a sharp downturn in the precious metals industry and the Brazilian economy between 2012 and 2014 spelled trouble. On top of all of this, his oil company collapsed into bankruptcy once it was discovered to be greatly exaggerating production claims. Promising to pay back all of his resulting debts left Batista with personal losses of $30 million. $35 billion in a single year, a number which approached $37 billion in the following years. A bank balance of -$1 billion was all Ike was left with. To make matters worse, in 2018, Batista was found guilty of paying more than $16 million in political bribes for public contracts during his peak years in Brazil. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. I guess you could say Ike Batista bomb. So, how do you feel about these billionaires? Do you have any sympathy for them? And how would you avoid losing it all as a billionaire? Let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching.